Welcome to the discussion. My guest today is Tay Fitzgerald, the Vice President for Strategic Missile Defense at Raytheon Missiles and Defense. Tay, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Let me set just a little context for our discussion today. The Defense Department is knee-deep in its review of its missile defense policy. Starting last summer, the first analysis of the current state of missile defense and where the capabilities need to go the next year should be done for the annual National Defense Strategy sometime in early 2022. The last time DoD took a hard look at its ability to defend the nation from missile threats and counter capabilities was 2017, with the report being released in 2019. Seems like a generation of technology ago. Experts say the strategy resulted in few, if any, changes to the current approach to missile defense. The expectations that this new review will have a bigger impact on the current and future state of missile defense is clear. In fact, Arms Control Today, a nonpartisan think tank, reported in June that the Biden administration plans to continue to build a new interceptor to counter long-range ballistic missile attacks. The other change we can expect from this review, according to Vice Admiral John Hill, the director of the Missile Defense Agency, is it will look at the entire threat space, not just the intercontinental ballistic missiles launched from places like North Korea. Other issues in the review may address, according to experts, include protecting U.S. assets from hypersonic and cruise missiles, as well as policy issues around acquisition, research, and of course, space. So for what we should watch for over the next few months, we're going to turn to our expert, Tay Fitzgerald, the Vice President for Strategic Missile Defense at Raytheon Missiles and Defense. So there's a lot going on with the missile defense area. It's a fascinating topic in many ways. So let's start with that review. What has changed since 2019 in your view?
The biggest thing that's changed for us, Jason, is the threat. You talked about it seems like a generation ago from a technology standpoint. It really has been. In the last 10 years, we've seen significant advances in the technology our adversaries are fielding. Hypersonics are emerging as one of the biggest threats we have. So if you think about ballistic missiles, historically our biggest threat, think of it as throwing a football. Pretty predictable arc, pretty easy to project where it's going to land, what it's going to do. Hypersonics, on the other hand, very, very fast moving and very highly maneuverable. So they're much harder to detect and track in their course, and in the end game, when they're the biggest threat to the ship is when they can pull the highest Gs, move the fastest, maneuver very quickly. So while we've had excellent discrimination capability, in other words, the ability to tell what a real target is relative to the countermeasure, that is not going to be adequate against the threats we're seeing today. Additionally, we're seeing cruise missile threats. These are weapons that are able to evade our current sensor capability. And hypersonics also have that capability to evade our current sensors. And we're also seeing the ability to launch from a bunch of different domains, land, sea, even space launches, a lot of hypersonics technology. We're talking space launches. So, potential attacks from a lot of different sources, a lot of different capability we haven't dealt with before. So I would expect to see significant pivots in this review.
I'm really appreciative that you went back and defined hypersonic, because we hear a lot about it, and it's always like, okay, but what is it? It sounds like something from the future, which, and in many ways, it is the future, because while I know Russia has, I think, tested one recently, where there was some discussions about them testing it. It's unclear how successful it was, and I think this is part of what the review is trying to do, is say, okay, what's the threat today, but what's the threat 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Yeah, absolutely. And hypersonics, to your point, hypersonic in and of itself is not a thing, right? So hypersonic is going greater than Mach 5, right? And so we're dealing with hypersonic weapons, right? Very, very fast, very, very maneuverable weapons. And exactly to your point, the very fact that our near peers, Russia, China, are able to demonstrate any capability at all tells us where they're going. So today's threat, do we expect to see a hypersonic weapon come across either of the poles tomorrow? No. Do we have to prepare ourselves for that prospect in the next several years? Yes. Do we think they're going to evolve countermeasures in the next several years coming from those weapons? Yes. So it's actually much more focused on the future than today.
The other piece of this I want to go back to is the threat from cruise missiles. You mentioned it can evade sensors. Is that just because of the way cruise missiles work? You have to maybe break it down for us a little bit. Or is it the sensors haven't caught up? And that's the other thing that this review's got to kind of take into consideration.
Again, historically, our biggest threats have been on nuclear-armed ballistic missiles that were a threat to our larger cities. That was the proposition, if you will, that we were looking at, which means, again, nice football arc, nice predictable. Cruise missile can see land skim well below our current radar field of view, if you think of it that way.
And imagine that as DoD is looking at what's the threats, it's something like that. Okay, how do we protect against it? How do we change the sensors? How do we deploy countermeasures to address those growing threats? Is that part of the discussions you're hearing, whether it's on Capitol Hill with testimony or just internally within DoD?
I think all the way around, all of the above is how I would answer that. Just this morning we saw Vice Admiral John Hill speaking and said one of the most pressing needs that we have is exactly to your earlier point. We really need global persistent sensing, whereas now we don't have that uniform coverage. And that means upgrading the sensors we have. It also means adding sensing capability from space. And more importantly, not just having that network of sensors across the globe, but making sure they're interoperable and that we've got good command and control between those sensors. And that discussion is happening all the way from the very top echelons of the DoD all the way down into industry. It's
so interesting that as you talk through what Vice Admiral Hill said and the things needed, I can think of, they need the cloud, they need JADC2, they need all the big data platforms, and it seems like that's what they're looking at. Okay, how do we apply these kind of technologies we think of as in the business world, in the back office world, or even to some extent to the tactical edge, to the missile defense? Is that one of the considerations that the DoD has got to start to bring in?
You are spot on. Some of the technologies that we talk about pretty regular, AI, ML, the amount of data that we're going to be talking about. When we do bring JADC2 and other C2 capabilities to bear, we're going to be dealing with a tremendous amount of data. You can't expect to have a human in the loop all the time. So AI, ML, data fusion, we're going to be getting a tremendous amount of data from very different types of sensors, again, from all over the world, space, sea, land, the ability to do that, and also very, very low latency. One of the things that we're doing in our company is a brand new sensor that's designed to do multiple missions simultaneously. So this software-defined aperture is what we call it. Again, very modern sensor, can do communications, can do digital beamforming, can do tracking and discrimination nearly simultaneously, right? So it's basically plug and play ready once we do get that JADC2 or similar C2 capability in place.
It's interesting when you talk about multiple missions, software defined. It's very similar, I'll dumb it down for myself at least, is this idea that when you have your desktop computer, you have a browser up, you're running your Microsoft Word, right? You have, it's again, much higher quality, but that's the sense, because you have so many things that are happening. It can't just be a one sensor for one thing. Is that why?
That is exactly right. That's exactly right. So today, for example, we have radars that are extremely good at long-range detection, right? I can see something coming from very, very far away. Different radars that are very, very good at discriminating countermeasures from the actual target. We need radars that can do all of the above. Just like when you're playing music on your phone, right? You don't expect the music to stop when a call comes in necessarily, right? Or if I want to check the news, I don't expect the music to stop. We've got to expect our effectors and our sensors to behave in the same way.
The piece I also want to touch upon is the AI and ML. There's a lot of discussion about the possibilities of applying this type of technology to whether it's missile defense or wherever across government. Where is the effort at today, and what are some of those considerations about AI and ML as the Biden administration and DoD starts writing this review? Because a lot of people seem to say, well, AI is not quite there. It's really the skin of the AI, but underneath it's still the kind of not intelligent automation, but more, I would say, dumb automation. It's still kind of pulling lots of data and sifting through it. It's not very quick. It's very challenging. What do they need to kind of consider around the AI and ML pieces?
So that is a fantastic question. I appreciate you asking it. The very fact that we conflate those terms, AI, ML, tells you something about our understanding of the technology, right? AI is a long way off, right? That's where we're talking, robots in space, right? That's when we get to the perfect AI solution. That's what it's going to look like. Now we're more in the machine learning domain, where we can feed enough data to an algorithm for it to help distinguish a countermeasure from a target, for example. I don't think we're going to get to an AI solution in the very, very near future, because again, that implies that I have a weapon learning on its own, right? And simply if you think about it, even from a policy perspective, that's probably not in our immediate future. But we are bringing ML to bear, particularly in offline data processing, even today.
And I think it goes back to that same concept we talked earlier about the hypersonics. It may not be here today, but we know that there's a future, and we better start preparing for it. And I think that's part of what this review is trying to do, is ensure that DoD is saying, okay, again, what's today, what's tomorrow, what's much in the future. The other piece that the review, I think, has to address is acquisition, and I think this is always a tough one. Because these programs can take a long time, because they cost a lot of money, is there some discussion, have you heard about whether or not, how to apply, here it comes, the buzzword, agile, iterative development toward this, to this weapon system, which many times you don't hear that DoD wants to apply that to a weapon system. It's more the old waterfall approach.
Right. I think that's a walk that we in the industrial base have to take with our customers to help them accept, understand, see, and believe that we really can execute that way. And it's a challenge for industry as well. It's not the way we've done business historically. A couple of things relative to acquisition. Historically, we've liked to think we can perfectly define what requirements are going to be, and then we're going to take our 10 years, we're going to build that solution, we're going to take another 5 years, and we're going to test it. The very first thing we have to do is accept the fact that we're not going to have perfect requirements, and that our initial fielding is not necessarily going to do everything we want it to do, but rather, exactly to your point, Jason, that we're going to have to build systems that we can get fielded very quickly using Agile, using digital engineering, and then have those systems be easily and readily upgradable. Just like the software-defined aperture I was talking about earlier, that system is designed to be very easily upgraded with software, right?
And so the software-defined piece.
Correct.
Exactly. When you talk with the Missile Defense Agency and others in DoD, are they starting to come around to this idea that they'd be more agile, more iterative? Because it's hard on weapon system, right? I mean, it's not so cut and dry as I need a piece of software that does this, and I needed software to add more capabilities.
Yeah, I think the customer is beginning to appreciate. We've done several agile software programs now where the community, the DoD community, can see the value added, can see how it does help us go faster. I think there's still a struggle in how you define progress, how do you define when something is quote unquote done, how do you go forward with something that doesn't have all the requirements defined right up front. We have in our company actually executed a hardware program that way as well successfully and just fielded it, so we know it can be done. We as the industry have to make our customers comfortable in that world.
Tay, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation. You're listening to the discussion, The Future of Missile Defense, sponsored by Raytheon Missile and Defense on Federal News Network.